Earlier this week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs represented Canada at the UN high-level conference on a two-state solution in New York. In recent days, I've spoken with our allies, including President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer, President von der Leyen. I've also had a number of discussions with our ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray. International cooperation is essential to securing lasting peace and stability in the Middle East, and Canada will do its best to help lead that effort. Canada has long been committed to a two-state solution, an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. For decades, it was hoped that this outcome would be achieved as part of a peace process built around a negotiated settlement between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. Regrettably, this approach is no longer tenable. Prospects for a two-state solution have been steadily and gravely eroded, including by the pervasive threat of Hamas terrorism to Israel and its people, culminating in the heinous attack of October 7, 2023, and the terrorist organization Hamas's long-standing violent rejection of Israel's right to exist and its rejection of a two-state solution. The accelerated settlement building across the West Bank and East Jerusalem, all the while settler violence against Palestinians has soared, has also undermined the process, as have actions such as the E1 settlement plan and this month's vote by the Knesset calling for the annexation of the West Bank, and the ongoing failure of the Israeli government to prevent the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian disaster in Gaza, with impeded access to food and other essential humanitarian supplies. The deepening suffering of civilians leaves no room for delay in coordinated international action to support peace, security, and the dignity of human life. Preserving a two-state solution means standing with all people who choose peace over violence or terrorism, and it means honoring their innate desire for peaceful coexistence of Israeli and Palestinian states as the only roadmap for a secure and prosperous long-term future. For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to recognize the State of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state. Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful and hopeful future. I spoke today with President Abbas at length to reaffirm his commitments. Canada reiterates that Hamas must immediately release all hostages taken in the horrific terrorist attack of October 7th, that Hamas must disarm, and that Hamas must play no role in the future governance of Palestine. Canada will always steadfastly support Israel's existence as an independent state in the Middle East, living in peace and security. Any path to lasting peace for Israel also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state, and one that recognizes Israel's inalienable right to security and peace. Canada will be a constructive partner in building a just, meaningful, and lasting peace in the region, and a future that respects the dignity, security, and the aspirations of all Palestinians and Israelis. We say the devastation in the Middle East is deeply personal to many Canadians. Palestinian Canadians are watching as communities across Gaza face destruction and deprivation, and as communities in the West Bank are annexed. The heinous attacks of October 7th traumatized the Jewish people in Israel and here in Canada. and around the world. With each day that the remaining hostages and the remains are not returned, families live in fear and grief. The rising anti-Semitism and words, actions, and violence, including against Jewish communities right here in Canada, is abhorrent. And it's why we're introducing legislation this fall that will make it a criminal offense to intentionally and willfully obstruct access to any place of worship, to schools and community centers. We will also invest in the physical protection of vulnerable communities and places of worship. Basic security is an inalienable right of every human being. We'll defend that right for every Canadian. The two-state solution that Canada supports is built on the promise of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace and security. I thank you for your attention. And the Minister and I would be happy now to take your questions.
Of course. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. You say that the recognition of a Palestinian state is predicated on important democratic reforms. Is it conditional on quick action towards those reforms? Is there any scenario in which you arrive at the General Assembly and don't recognize Palestine?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Wells. Let me say on the second part, it's an intention. So, of course, there's a scenario, possibly one that I can't imagine, so I wouldn't want to. If there were no scenario, we would proceed immediately. That's the first point. But to go more broadly, and I think this is an important area you're concentrating on, it's predicated, it relies upon the representations that have been made by the Palestinian Authority, representations that have been made now several times, both publicly spoken, in writing to me as Prime Minister, and representations that I tested, if you will, President Abbas in a lengthy and robust call today to confirm the intentions and the ability to do so. Now, part of what Minister Anand and her colleagues are doing is to provide some resources to help with some governance aspects of those. But of course, the most important elements of those representations with respect to the democratic process. Who cannot be part of that process? Hamas. Who can play no role in the future state? Hamas. The demilitarization and the persistent demilitarized Palestinian state. And of course, the reinforcement of the importance of living side by side in peace and security with Israel. So it's a relatively short period. Last observation, if I may. It's a relatively short period of time between now and the UN General Assembly. But we'll be working with the Palestinian Authority, and very importantly, not just us, but a series of our allies and regional powers, including those that the Minister was with in New York earlier this week, and I can't name them all, but of course, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and others, who also, to broaden your question a bit, have been very clear now that Hamas can play no role, that Hamas must return all the hostages and their remains, and the Palestinian state must be demilitarized.
Follow-up. Yesterday, you had announced no intention to recognize Palestine. Today, you have announced that intention. It's impossible for me not to read into that a critique of Israel's recent behavior in the region.
Well, it's there are elements, and I listed them in my remarks, and they played a central factor in our decision. I think one of the core points is that Canada's had a long-standing principled stand, as you know. I won't repeat it. You're familiar with it. A belief in a two-state solution, the inalienable rights of both peoples, and the fact that peace and security could only be achieved through it. That prospect, that possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before our eyes. The accelerated settlements, the potential partition of the West Bank, the actions in Gaza that shift large portions of the population, 80% of the population displaced. Other actions which are changing the facts on the ground in a way that removes the possibility or lessens the possibility of there being a Palestinian state. And then when that is reinforced by votes to that effect, by statements and policies to that effect of the government, yes, that has been one of the factors that has brought us to this point to try to reverse with partners. We're not under illusions about the strength of Canada, but to reverse with partners this cycle so that a two-state solution becomes viable. Lots more has to happen for it to be there. Thank you.